Inspiring awareness through play. This is our mission in a nutshell, and we will be diving into what this means during our talk here today. So what we do, we aim to create games that directly address mental health without sacrificing story, look, or playability. We intend these games to be widely accessible and fun to play. And by widely accessible, we mean inclusive in the target audience. So these are games that could be enjoyed across age ranges and backgrounds. We hope to accomplish this through choice of platform, innovative narrative design, gorgeous art, and meaningful mechanics. So why do this now? Well, as we all know, the pandemic has taken a huge toll on societies around the globe. All we need to do is look to our own families, friends, and communities to witness the fallout. And the resources for mental health are sorely lacking in relation to the rapid escalation of this problem and are often available only to the most educated or affluent. You need to already know. For serious conversations with serious people, but by limiting the discourse around these issues in their designated corners, we reinforce stigma and cut many people off from the information and the support that they need. So this raises the question of what does all this mean for creators and how can we help? Well, the potential for games to increase awareness and reduce suffering is real, yet there are surprisingly few games that address mental health while also maintaining broad appeal. This is a missed opportunity. As we all know, games offer a safe space to explore feelings, experience new points of view, and master new skills that can directly relate to improving mental health. So the need is there, the potential is there, and the market is also there. Let's take a look now at the real market need and potential. So the market for games that directly address health is only going to increase in the coming years. By 2026, games are expected to be a $321 billion industry, and by 2032, the healthcare gamification market is expected to be valued around $27 billion. Obviously, these are projections, and it's all change over time. Here's the numbers we have currently. We've already seen a boom in ed tech and digital interventions in healthcare, and games serving a new purpose and solving problems within society are becoming an integral part of the industry's landscape. Now, as you can see here, in terms of this popularity in the United States, this is the ESA, they reported 69% of American households have at least one video game player, and 77% have parents who report playing video games with their children. 89% of Americans say playing games lower stress, hence they became very widely used during the pandemic. And 88% of Americans view video games as useful for building cognitive skills. So these are statistics for the United States, but we see similar trends elsewhere and reported in other nations. And when you consider numbers globally, we are looking at an enormous market. So we have here a proven market and a product with proven benefits. So what is available to us right now? Well, surprisingly, The dedicated offerings for mental health are quite limited, especially when you're talking about the broad commercial realm. So let's take a look at some products that live somewhere in the space of mental health. Well, we have the wellness market. These are what often what feel like a million apps out there for breathing, mindfulness, and improving your attitude and your outlook. And the claim goes something like this. All you have to do is spend 5 to 10 minutes a day on our app and your life will be significantly improved. And these products are cheap to make, cheap to buy, to access, and they do have broad market appeal. They include things such as mindfulness apps, breathing apps, stress management, and life hacking apps. These products are often very fitness oriented, right? Fit in the mind, fit in the body. You can play the video.
If you have always said you could learn how to become happy simply through an app, then I have given it for you. There's an app called Happify, and what it does is exactly that. It breaks down happiness into different components, different guidelines, different exercises, and helps you to become happier.
So this is all for $15 a month. You see that you can really achieve something here. So what are the limitations with these apps, right? Well, for one thing, the market is pretty saturated. There's a ton of these apps out there already, and they're being made all the time. The apps are quite limited in what they can accomplish, often over-promising and under-delivering, like potentially Happify. And they're pretty trendy. People tend to buy into them like any other fitness fad, and then they often move on. So what else is out there? Well, in the United States, there's been a push for clinically proven prescriptive mental health games, especially for children. Now, these types of games are truly a challenge to make. Now, why is that? Well, mental health conditions are especially dynamic, personal, and ever-changing. They manifest differently in every person, and the experience of, say, anxiety or depression can change dramatically on a daily or even an hourly basis. But there are studios out there that are trying to make a difference. So let's take a look at a couple of those products now. And play the video. Okay, so the game we just looked at from Endeavor RX is a prescription-based game meant to treat childhood ADHD. The game engine uses an innovative algorithm to test and hone the player's performance on attention-based tasks. So optimizing performance at attention tasks is the goal of the game. The game leads with the thesis that getting better at these tasks will directly improve a child's ADHD in real life. However, there are unfortunately complaints about the player experience, so it often feels like homework to kids whose performance can be tracked and analyzed by their parents. And it's not clear if any of the purported outcomes are solid, persistent, or lasting. Let's take a look at another product that's recently been designed for young people. That's fine. Okay, enough. So what we just witnessed was one of the games from Mightier, another product that has won clinical approval and is supposed to help kids with emotional regulation. The company states that after 3 months of Mightier, 84% of parents report improvements in their child's anger, frustration, or aggressive behavior, and 71% of parents report improvements in impulsivity and or hyperactivity. So this is an interesting, though limited, approach to gaming. It's essentially a biofeedback tool that may teach emotional regulation through physiological control. The games are not, however, designed to give the child a deeper awareness of how they are feeling or what it means to have these feelings in the first place.
So the biggest issue here is access. The hardware and subscription packages are expensive, and there exists technological barriers. So these games designed to serve as clinically proven do have certain limits. One is access. They tend to be expensive, need a prescription, or have bespoke technology that can present compliance or user interface problems. There is a burden of proof and measurable efficacy for games saying, X number of players are improved by Y capacity at a factor of Z. And this can be antithetical to the game design and narrative itself. And it is very hard to prove clinically that a game is reducing anxiety or curing ADHD. There are too many variables that are difficult to control for, so the trials tend to have a tenuous aspect to them. For example, would watching a television show, playing another kind of game, or maybe taking a nature walk for 25 minutes a day produce similar results? So despite best efforts, it's just a really hard thing to measure. And the need to answer claims with metrics really limits what the game can be. And finally, these types of games lean into the theory that mental health can be fixed through a sort of performance optimization, that the behavior is the main problem and the focus for solution. So the question for us at Terra Lumen Games, and the reason that we decided to found this studio, is there a way to address mental health in a different way? And can we invite a new type of engagement from our player audience? Recent Disney movies have actually done a pretty wonderful job at examining serious psychological issues while leaving room for highly personal experiences as an audience member. If you take a look at Encanto, for example, among other themes, this film examines intergenerational trauma and the process of healing through complex family dynamics. It does this primarily through story and lyrics. And what is really beautiful about this film is that there is something for most people. When we watch it in a family setting, which we do, we have kids, most of us will relate personally to one or more of the characters and come away with something meaningful as a result. So my kids are crying, but I'm also crying. They're laughing, but I'm also laughing. And the film is not trying to force one experience on you as much as it is inviting you to engage with a nuanced and complete world. So what about addressing mental health in a similar way? Can we do with mechanics what Disney does with lyrics, for example? Can we make our stories as welcoming, as colorful, and as inclusive? Now, there are already some truly beautiful games, which I'm sure many of you have played out there, that examine deep psychological issues, often metaphorically. And the question for us is just how intentional can we be without being prescriptive? And can we make a game that the whole family might play instead of just kids or just adults? So basically, can we have our cake and eat it too? And so drawing from precedent and looking at products that have come through the market so far, we can take certain lessons and apply them to our approach. So first and foremost, make the game something people can and want to play. It needs to capture the imagination. A genre like the action-adventure game is widely popular and also familiar, and this kind of a genre offers many ways to carry the message through story, character, and traversal. And we want to get our games into as many hands as possible. So this relates back to genre and platform, but also to market. Within the indie game ecosystem, there are times when the word commercial is sort of uttered like a dirty word. I mean, it's thought that maybe the game isn't innovative enough or isn't trying hard enough. But in a situation where you're trying to get a game to as many hands as possible to affect real change, commercial is good. It's really important because it has reach. And we believe in a holistic approach to both the game design and the player. So seeing the player as a whole person rather than just a data point, and taking into account their thoughts, their feelings, and their self-awareness. So let's make the story meaningful. Let's think carefully about setting, character arc, and what the arc represents. And finally, the mechanics, the game mechanics, right? The core of the game. This is where we can make a real impact. What the player actually does in the game, their actions, their powers, their setbacks, can impart coping skills and build new feedback loops that the player might even carry with them into real life. And what do we want the audience to come away with? Like, why are we doing this? Well, if the player comes away with just one of these, to our mind, the game has been a success. So one is enjoyment. Did the player have a good time playing the game? And did they choose to play it of their own volition instead of somebody telling them that they have to play this to do a certain thing or to get better at something? Can the player describe their thoughts or feelings a little better as a result of the game? Did they come away with new words or metaphors to describe how they feel, what their experiences have been? Have they related? And do they feel more compassionate towards themselves or someone else who's been through something similar? Is the game building empathy? Is it building compassion? Have they learned anything practical? Has there been a transference of skills, even if just self-acceptance, as a result of having played? And are they more aware of the condition presented in the game? Have we reached them? Are we getting it out there that these conditions exist, raising awareness, and bringing to our attention that these kinds of conditions deserve to be addressed? And now I turn the stage over to my colleague, Allison, who will discuss our current project.
Hi, everybody. You're looking at a little bit of concept art from the game we're just beginning to work on. And we'll talk a little bit about our approach and action and give you guys a brief dive into some of the key art, the elements of design, and some of the thought processes behind our approach to video games with a mental health focus. So our first game currently in really early stage development is called Cora. The pillars of design that Erin just introduced to you before really informed our choices of platform and game style from the beginning. So Cora is going to be for console PC. It's a single player, third person, semi-open world adventure game. Lots of opportunities for exploration and traversal in addition to that main story arc of the game. It's going to feature magical realist style, and our target audience is families. But that will really translate to a game that is playable for youth through adults, so accessible to the youngest players, but actually interesting enough and beautiful enough and meaningful enough so that adolescents and even adults can play. So this is not going to be a traditional kiddie game. So the main story of Cora is this. You see some concept art from one of our levels called the Pine Forest. Cora is, I think, a perfect hero. She's a kind and intelligent and sensitive young girl who just happens to suffer from anxiety. So on her walk to school one morning, a particularly difficult morning for her, she's pulled through a portal in an oak tree and transported to a fantastical world that we're calling the Inner Lands. And while exploring this new place, she encounters forests of oak trees, pine, open meadows of mustard flowers, poppies, rivers, mountains, dunes, canyons, and caves. But she's also encountering manifestations of her actual anxiety everywhere in challenging physical barriers, visual distortions. And with the help of animal guides, she'll gradually learn how to counter those obstacles and embrace her true self, including her anxiety, in order to find her way home. So there'll be magic, there'll be adventure and humor, but there's also going to be persistence and there'll be some struggle as well. When we were creating Cora and making anxiety that main focus, all along we kept those earlier principles, those pillars of design in mind. So we want to make it accessible to all players. We want to actually make it fun to play and not feel like work. And we want to be diligent about seeding that message into the mechanics and beyond, that holistic approach. So how exactly are we going to go about executing the holistic approach? We looked at all those ways that humans learn best. So we looked at relatability, reinforcement, and repetition, and we harnessed those methods of learning in our game design to get our message across. So when it comes to relatability, we're talking about social learning. We as humans, and especially kids, do some of our best learning through the stories of other people. By witnessing and participating in Cora's journey, the players will be emboldened to learn from her mistakes and her successes, and players will be encouraged to draw those parallels back to their lives and to themselves and to their relationships with other people. So there's empathy here, but there's also a little bit of safe space between the player and Cora in the game that allows for that kind of reflection. Reinforcement. So immersive reinforcement is our goal. In designing Cora, we didn't want to just stop at story and character, but instead we wanted to keep the theme of mental health in mind at every step of the design process. So yes, it's a narrative, yes, it's a story arc, but it's also going to be infused into those actual mechanics, into the world design, and into the level design itself. So we aim to kind of embed knowledge about the anxiety in the story, in the dialogue, but we want to also see the whole time as we design. How does it sound? How does it look? How does it feel to have anxiety? Let's let those actual or mental health conditions into the game mechanics themselves. So repetition. I think you guys know, by being game players, games are natural classrooms, right? Escalating difficulty, motor repetition, it provides that built-in framework for the practice of therapeutic techniques. But for the purposes of the talk today, we'll just focus on relatability and reinforcement as we dive a little deeper into Cora as a game. So what makes Cora special as a main character? So obviously Cora's strength is not defined by killing monsters or a death valley or out-strategizing her competition or winning points. But she's also not on a journey through the inner lands to cure her anxiety. This is about awareness and it's about amelioration, but it's not going to be about fixing her. So really she's kind of powered by this willingness to try and to redefine that relationship with struggle with herself. And we'll see that in her story journey and in her physical journey throughout the game world. And we want players to get to know her, to really root for her and identify with her, and to hopefully then be able to reflect the facts for themselves. So in addition to learning skills in the game and exploring and meeting Cora in the dialogue, we also use collection. Collecting is an opportunity to motivate and inform players for getting to know the main character. So some of the categories of collection that we have available in the game is we have something called Flourishing Key. This is a really early concept art that we're doing for it. Fragments of this key you collect at the end of every level challenge, so that eventually will build a key to unlock the doorway home. But you can also collect things we're calling talismans. So those are actually going to be objects from her real bedroom, back in the real world, that you can find throughout the game map. And we also have something we're calling memory reflections. So those will be images and drawings created by Cora that you can find in bodies of water as you explore. And those will offer that additional window into her life and her life experience, both positive and negative. So players will be able to traverse and retraverse the map and collect. And all the while, they'll be inadvertently learn about Cora. So we actually use setting as another way of getting closer to Cora. So on one hand, we're trying to design an interactive and reactive environment. So one that will shift and change in response to Cora and her feelings at any moment in time. But we also want to design a world that feels grounded in real life and that really celebrates nature. So we ended up deciding to use California terrain and Californian artists to be the main inspiration for the environment. This is some work by an artist named Evan Earl. You may have known for doing Disney's Sleeping Beauty, but he was local to California. So we wanted to imagine a world that was made up of places that Cora could have actually seen in her real life, and those could in turn rip and shape her imagination. And that makes it more personal to her, and it also became more personal to us as creators. So we could go out into the real world and be directly inspired, bring it back to the game. We can ask questions as they come up in the design process, then actually look for answers in the real world environment and in turn shape the level design and the challenge design based off of what we find. So what do we mean when we say message and mechanics? So let's take a look at how we're kind of using blocks and skills in the game. So in our game, a block is an obstacle to progress that's inspired by a specific aspect of anxiety. A skill is a special in-game power that will be based off of a proven therapeutic technique or tool. So in Cora, blocks and skills actually work as pairs. It's a symptom versus a tool to help counter or mitigate it, and each is designed in partnership to help bring light to one aspect of anxiety. Anxiety is this really incredibly dynamic, incredibly nuanced thing, right? So how are we going to actually translate that into gameplay so that it's most understandable, it's still fundamental to the story, but it's actually making it really exciting and fun and fluid gameplay. It's like a really interesting design challenge. How do you actually best infuse a game mechanic with emotion or with actual lived experience? So to take a little bit of a deeper look at how blocks and skills work in Cora, we're going to focus on one pair, and it's a block called Doubt and a skill called Affirm. So the level you encounter this block and skill pair is set within a grove of trees, and at its heart is this massive sequoia tree with a treehouse crowning its top branches. This is like a mid-stage level of the game. At this point, the players already encountered a variety of blocks. We've got most of a core set of skills. You have to climb to the top of the terrace treehouse, and as part of that main level challenge, Cora will acquire and then use the Affirm skill to counter doubt. So this is a super physically demanding level. There's going to be lots of tricky and challenging traversal. So she begins to climb the tree. Cora encounters a doubt block. Doubt was designed to represent negative self-talk created by anxiety and how that actually impedes your action. Our early art concepting, as you can see some of it here, we're imagining it as a gray smoke or light that wraps around her head and shoulders. It acts in a fashion similar to a poison attack or like a semi-paralysis. So the run speed, the jump height, lifting ability becomes impeded. Her body posture changes. She gets to fold inward slightly. Working on this project is a really interesting thought experiment at all times, and it's a very personal one. So how do you feel when you're experiencing doubt and you're doubting yourself and your abilities? How do you feel when you doubt your desire, you don't have a desire to move forward on something, or if you really feel stymied? And then how can you take that and put that into actual gameplay? So Cora is able to, through a conversation with her animal guide, and on this level, it's a little bird named a Stellar's Jay, to acquire a new skill to counter her doubt. And we call this skill affirm. And it's to represent not positive affirmations, but actually affirming a willingness to try. The affirm mechanic is styled on like a traditional power boost, basically. So it'll counter the effects of doubt, it'll allow for boosted running and jumping for a set period of time. So this is going to be our in-game equivalent of like the Mario Superstar. But the skill isn't really meant to be that fast food notion of saying nice things to myself will actually make me better. But rather, this is trying to make a more nuanced statement about affirming that willingness to try despite uncertainty, despite your anxiety around it, and despite what the outcome might actually be. And in that willingness, you'll be able to, or Cora will be able to move forward and eventually find herself capable despite the doubt she suffered from. So we had a really interesting time writing the dialogue, and dialogue has played a really important role in our game to get some of the deeper message and that nuance across. It's another design tool, essentially, and we wanted to make some key points here and some key distinctions that are not often talked about when you think about self-doubt or you think about avoidance. We didn't want Jay, the animal guide, to just give Cora a pep talk and then off she goes and hooray, you're cured. We ultimately wanted it to be her decision to move forward, for her to be willing, not to be made or told exactly what to do. And we wanted to give a real value and real attention to how it actually feels to that person who's struggling and not to minimize it in any way. So we're really lucky to have part of our team a brilliant clinical psychologist, and she holds us to this really high standard when it comes to writing the level challenge dialogue. But it's a good thing, because we don't want to lose that nuance that's such an integral part of mental health and that experience of mental health. So this is just a little excerpt from the treehouse level dialogue, and we paired it with a screenshot of our early prototyping. So you can see there's Jay and Cora, and just bear with us, we're going to do a little play. We're going to read the dialogue for you. But to set the scene, the doubt block has just hit right before one final jump that Cora has to make. And the Jay has come to talk to her to help support her in making that jump. And he's been talking to her for a little while, but she's still not willing to move forward in any way. And the Jay has just flown the distance between there and back and measured it with his little body. And then he turns to Cora and he says,
Well, I think you could make it.
I really can't.
I measured it.
Yeah, but I'm the one who has to make the jump. You're not listening to the part of me that's scared.
You're right, it does look like a big jump.
So it's just a fragment. And the conversation goes on for a while after that. And Cora is eventually able to move forward when she's ready. There's actually a lot of empty space in that dialogue scene where the animal guide sits and waits for her to decide, and you as a player sit and watch her deciding. And she's eventually able to gain that skill and use it to beat the level. But it's a really important moment, I think, that speaks to our approach and our intentions when it comes to seeding message into the game. To look at this little fragment deeper, when you provide evidence to someone in distress, it can actually feel really invalidating to the person. So even if if it seems really helpful at the time and you're trying to comfort somebody, like here we have Jay saying, no, I measured it, it's okay. You really can do it. I think you can do it. But we wanted to write Cora explicitly saying back to Jay how she's really feeling. So she counters him by stating, I'm the one who has to jump. I'm scared to do it, and you're not hearing me when I say that. And it becomes an important turning point in the dialogue, and it becomes a pivotal beat in the game, because then we finally get to see Jay respond by saying, you're right, it is a big jump, and I can see why you feel the way you do, and it's okay that you feel that way. This is one of those teaching moments, I would say, that we feel hopeful for when we're designing, where the player might be able to, in that moment, reflect back on an interaction they had in their own lives with somebody who maybe they didn't understand at the time or didn't get what they were feeling. And then possibly they can move forward in the future with better language for how they or someone they know might be feeling in the future. Just to conclude, this is one of the other sections of the treehouse level. Cora is facing off with an orb spider and a quote from Ursula Le Guin, because she's awesome. But in summation, there are a lot of lifestyle apps. You saw a few here, and there are prescription games out there for mental health, and they have pluses and minuses. But what they do show is there's this really robust market for games about mental health, and it's only getting bigger. And we have some really excellent commercial titles out there already. You saw some screenshots of them earlier when Erin was speaking, but there's Hellblade, Grease, Celeste, Spiritfarer, Life is Strange. Maybe some of you have seen or played these games. And they show that there's this increasing demand, I think, for players that want video games that just have more emotion, more thought, more intent to them, more feeling. But we are glad to have gotten to give you guys a chance to have a little overview about the scene in terms of mental health and games, and get a sneak peek at Cora and our thought and design process. So thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we have ample time for questions, comments, anything to start.
My inner laughter is shaking right now. I love what you're doing. And I already see the dozens of people who are heavily interested in this, including me. So my question, I guess, for many people as well is, how does one get to contribute and work in this project?
Oh, wow. That is we've been told to repeat your questions back to the microphone. So how do you get involved with Cora as a project?
Well, I think the best way would be actually just to reach out to us. At this point, we are in the prototyping stage. So we are building out the playable prototype. We are working with a very small team of engineers and artists for this at this point. And then we'll be moving from this into the vertical slice, at which point we will be building out our team pretty significantly and hopefully going from there into full development, which we expect to take about 2 years. And then another year after that, obviously, for release, for porting, and for QA and all of that. So yes, please reach out to us is the best way, or come talk to us after this, and we will take down your information and we can do a Zoom chat. Yeah, great. Because we're definitely building up right now, sort of our roster for people that we might be able to work with moving forward. Yes.
Yeah. So so a couple of years back, I was doing transferability games and applications.
Sure.
And stuff like that.
Yes.
So the baseline of the question is that, okay, so I'm reading a book, fiction book.
Yeah.
Of course, I have some kind of transfer.
Yeah.
So the output of that being a clear, like you said in the beginning,
Yeah.
it's like a step away from the measurability.
Yeah.
Demand itself.
Right.
So how are you thinking about, because you have this clear, like, here's a learning point, here's something you want people to take away.
Yes.
At least some people to take away.
Yes.
So how are you dealing with the idea that there is a low transferability, like proven transferability?
Sure.
That's
So the question is, how are we dealing with the fact that there is we are trying to impart certain skills, for example, but we're not weighted down with, or our approach is not, let's prove this in sort of a measurable form. Well, for one thing, I am not completely convinced that you can prove it in measurable form. So I've read the research that goes into these reports, and I come from I've done a lot of work in psychology and neuroscience. I'm very familiar with research papers, and it's very hard for me to look at these reports and think, okay, this is actually really a proven measurable result. It does not come across that way to me. And it's my belief that, art, which games are, they change people. They make a big difference for people. And it really comes into what is the intention? What are you putting into the art product? And are you intentional about what it is? And do you know what those aspects of design are and what they're trying to reflect? But in terms of trying to control what somebody walks away with, that is not an approach that we are particularly interested in. So what we can do is we can offer, the reason I brought up Encanto is they examine so many amazing things. So they have like a character, there's a perfectionist, right? And you have a lot of young kids that are like, oh my God, I'm like Isabella, And then they have the character, Luisa, who is the one that has to lift everything for the family. And she's basically being crushed under the weight of that. And there are people like that can relate to that. But, they're not asking you at any point, they're not hitting you over the head and saying, you have to change or, it's just your approach. So how do you want to approach art? How do you want to approach a product? If you really do want to measure something, there are ways to do it. There are some amazing products coming out of, for example, Grendel Games. That's very different, but they do a lot of games for things like surgeons practicing, getting training practice in. There's some amazing games. They've done a game for if you have chronic pain that has come out of a trauma. There's a game where you can actually, VR, you can kind of go through and watch how pain travels through your neuronal system. And by doing that, there are ways for you to actually, apparently, you can sort of, through learning that mechanism, you can almost learn to control some of your own pain. If you have a very, very specific thing that you are trying to do, there are actually ways that games can do it, and it is a valid and very, very important part of development. And I find those projects absolutely fascinating. But in terms of raising awareness about mental health conditions like depression, like anxiety, bringing that into a more common dialogue and making it just a part of life, the way that we've been trying to do in the arts and entertainments with just diversity, inclusivity, that kind of thing, that is not the approach that we are trying to take. It does not mean it's not a valid approach, if that answers your question.
I would actually expand a little bit on that too, because actually it's something that we're constantly thinking of in the back of this. What value is this game going to bring? Because we know that there's this great need and we have a real desire to bring value to the players and as many players as possible, right? And so we kind of have a hierarchy of goals that we keep in mind as we move forward for the game. And at the most fundamental level, we want to have a game that just is awesome and delightful to play. And I think you may have seen from some of the clips of the mental health apps for kids, that FDA approach, that the actual game itself, I don't know about your personal opinions on it as games players, but it's not that exciting or deep of a game, right? And so therefore, the kid is not necessarily going to stick with it like they would with Zelda, for example.
Okay.
So at our fundamental level, we want it to be a fun and amazing gameplay experience. One level up from that, maybe you actually learn something about anxiety as a player. Another level up from that, you connect with Cora and you make some kind of connection between her and yourself, some sort of pathway for self-reflection. And then that final level, maybe you actually get skills or thought or a language for something you can bring back and apply to later in life. And all that being said, in the playtesting process, we will still constantly be trying to get feedback from our players about who they are, what role anxiety plays in their life, kind of what they came into the gameplay experience with and what they came out of. Right?
Yeah, that's a really important point.
But it's hard to quantify, obviously. Right. So that feedback will be kind of a different nature than what you're seeing in terms of statistics, right?
Yeah, no, feedback playtesting is extremely important, including playtesting with your focus audience, your target group. But it's just, how are you trying to, what kind of feedback are you going after? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that the concept art that you could show it looks amazing. I'm very excited to see how that translates into the art that you mentioned. I was curious about seeing as one of the large benefits of video games is the dynamic, interactive nature of them as opposed to the static nature of books and films.
Mm-hmm.
Are you looking to sort of utilize that in the sense of making a personalized experience for the players? Because I know anxiety, along with lots of other mental issues, are, like you mentioned previously, very personal experiences that vary from person to person. Mm-hmm. Is that something you're looking to address, maybe building something that sort of grows and adapts along with the player, or is it going to be a very linear, sort of one and done story?
So that's a really great question. So how are we going to give something that's a more personal experience to the player that's more than just a kind of linear one and done story? So we do have in Cora your main story arc, right? And that's based around those level skill challenges. So you're moving through the map, acquiring skill after skill, and you're building and then practicing over and over and using them in new ways. Because in a way, it is almost like a 3D platformer, right? So you're doing a lot of traversal and you're using those skills and encountering those blocks over and over again. But we're designing the world map to hopefully be at least semi-open so that you as a player can choose to divert from that path whenever possible, go on small side adventures, decide to collect every single talisman on the map, things that really excite you about the game. And there are other things that we didn't get to discuss here, like specific types of animations that you encounter in the natural world. You can go and you can pursue that. So that is one way of getting a kind of personal player experience. We also wanted to design Cora, I think, so that she felt almost as inclusive as possible. And there was even a time where we were debating having her be customizable herself, but we wanted you to connect with a really strong character. Just like when we read a book or we're learning from the experiences of others, we're still able to kind of step outside and take away what we want personally from that person's story. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. Yeah.
One more question, and I just want to say thank you for that. The dialogues, since you were talking about having them be kind of part of the story and the professional narrative parts, right? So I understand the early production. So I think they're about to change. But where are you right now? Thinking about how is it like adventure games time where you press per thing, or is it like fluent voiceover things happening as you traverse areas?
Both.
Both, yeah.
Both. There's both.
Yeah, we incorporate, sure, I'll start and then you can incorporate dialogue in the following ways. You do have that traditional structure of here's my main challenge and here's my, I could go back to it, but here's my animal guide. And I'm talking to the animal guide and I'm using that, wrong one. And I'm using that moment to really unpack some of the things around anxiety that do need to be explained and highlighted in detail. And learn more about Cora, really hear her in those moments. But then all throughout the map, you'll have chances to interact with other kind of NPC animals. You'll have a lot of Cora's vocalizations throughout as she's traversing, as she's hitting blocks and skills. So you're getting that reinforcement sprinkled in all along the way, not just on that main story.
Yeah, it'll be, it's you'll hear some parts of her inner monologue as well, just as she goes. It won't be, you won't be hearing her all the time. It's not going to be like, Hellblade where you're hearing, the voices or anything like that all the time, just such an important part of that game. But there will be parts throughout the map where you can like hear her thoughts, just as we
I was curious too about accessibility in the game, because I know, like when building a game like this, I imagine you want to reach as broad of an audience as possible and make it as accessible to anyone. So how are you looking at, like, for example, adapting the game so that someone with maybe a physical disability would be able to still experience the game?
It's a really good question. I mean, at this point, we are not building that part of it, but we will want to build that part of it. So it's a matter of, getting through these early parts of development, but then bringing on a team to consider all of those aspects. Yeah, we need expertise specific to that.
One more question. I think it's just what is the projected playthrough duration of the game, and have you already thought about how the pace of the experience might impact and rather maximize the learning potential and potential to acquire the mental tools that you want?
That's a good question. So how long is the gameplay, or what we're estimating the gameplay to be, and what was the second half again?
Have you already tried to work with how the pace of the experience is going to be for the players, so to maximize potential learn the skills?
Right, and how are we going to basically maximize potential learning? So we only have a rough estimate right now in terms of the actual gameplay, right? It's a kind of mid-sized game, not a full open world where you can spend 30 plus hours. We're looking at about somewhere between maybe 10 to 15 hours of total gameplay if you're following the story arc. But that being said, because we are trying to put a certain amount of semi-open exploration and encouraging retraversal and collecting, there is ways of possibly type of gameplay, and hopefully you want to come back and play it again and it'll just be a one-time thing. And in terms of kind of reinforcing the message, a lot of that will come into the actual level design because the blocks are so intimately linked to traversing the environment. The more you explore, the more parts of the map that you open up, hopefully. And actually having core repeat skills, seeing the link between the blocks and skills, getting those snippets of her voiceover as she's encountering them, that you yourself will begin to not just master the actual physical gameplay, but you yourself will begin to kind of say, okay, this is this type of situation. This is what I do at this moment.
Yeah, and there's a ramping up that happens actually. So the earlier levels of the game, they're a little slower, and you're learning, you're exploring, you're having choices of paths to take, you're beginning to gather skills, you're beginning to get a sense of what the world is, you're learning what the talismans are, how they connect way back. We didn't go into it, but they actually connect to a prologue at the very beginning where you see her room and you see all the things in the room. Well, you end up finding those things. And those early levels are sort of building levels. There's still a lot of open exploration, but they're not as fast. And then once you've sort of acquired all of the main skills and you've learned how to counter blocks and you've learned how to start combining them, you go up into a mount level, which is sort of the second half of the game. And at that point, you get advanced versions of the skills that basically unlock the magic of the world, additional magic in the world. So earlier skills, you're able to start doing different things, like you can jump, further, you can run faster. But then, for example, in the later stage of the game, one of the skills is breathe, and in the later stage of the game, you can utilize that to do all kinds of sort of beautiful, controlled different animations within the game itself. So you get to the world really opens up the more you go through it.
You get rewarded for playing. Hopefully.
You do, yeah. It just becomes more beautiful. So hopefully, right?
And then
it goes the way we want.
Yeah. And then one more thing we didn't get to mention here is this idea of a hit mode or a difficulty mode. And we wanted to put that in so that the youngest players who need more hand-holding through the whole thing, or someone who wants to play with more overt messaging about anxiety and the skills, to really get that outside of the dialogue of main story arc and do that, and hit mode actually functions in that way. So it's a slightly altered experience of gameplay that has a lot more of the words and the meaning.
It's a different thing.
So that brings us to the end of this session. Please join me